They said she was broken. They said she was a burden that no man would want. In the unforgiving winter of 1883, inside a whiskey-stained saloon in Montana, a father looked his own daughter in the eye and traded her life for a debt of $40 and a fresh horse. Mercy Calloway wasn't looking for love. She was just looking to survive the night. But the man who bought her, a towering, silent ghost named Colton Graves, wasn't looking for a servant. He was looking for salvation. What happens when a woman convinced she is worthless falls into the hands of a dangerous man who treats her like a queen? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the brutal, true story of how a lonely mountain man built a home from the ashes of a woman's past, and the deadly secret that almost destroyed them both. Iron Creek, Montana Territory, November 1883. The mud in Iron Creek was thick enough to pull the boot right off a man's foot, but it was the cold that truly killed you. It was a wet, biting cold that settled deep in the marrow of your bones and refused to leave until spring. Mercy Calloway stood on the porch of the Last Drop Saloon, shivering not just from the wind, but from the voices arguing inside. She was 22 years old, though her eyes held the weary look of a woman twice that age. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to hide the slight twist in her spine and the limp in her left leg, the souvenir of a childhood fever that had never quite let her go. To her father, Obadiah Calloway, that limp was a ledger entry in red ink. It made her slow in the fields. It made her unappealing to the local ranch hands. In Obadiah's eyes, Mercy was a mouth to feed that offered no return on investment. The saloon door swung open, spilling yellow light and the stench of stale tobacco onto the porch. Her stepmother, Beatrice, stepped out, wiping her hands on a greasy apron. "Get inside, girl," Beatrice hissed, her voice like grinding stones. "Your father's done talking. The deal is struck." Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs. "Deal? What deal, Beatrice? Don't you use that tone with me. He's found a way to settle the tab with the grocer and the blacksmith. You should be grateful. Most fathers would have turned a cripple out to starve years ago." Mercy limped inside. The heat of the room hit her, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and cheap rye. The noise of the patrons died down as she entered. They all knew. In a town the size of Iron Creek, secrets were as scarce as gold dust. Obadiah was sitting at a corner table, his face flushed with drink. Opposite him sat a mountain of a man. That was the only way Mercy could describe him. He was seated, yet he loomed. He wore a coat made of bear fur that still looked wild, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, shadowing his eyes. His beard was dark, flecked with the premature gray of a hard life, and a long, jagged scar ran from his ear down into the collar of his shirt. This was Colton Graves. The townspeople whispered about him. They said he lived up on the Devil's Spine, the highest peak in the range. They said he trapped wolves and lived like one. Some said he had killed a man in Wyoming. Others said he was a ghost who didn't bleed. "Come here, Mercy," Obadiah slurred, waving a hand dismissively. Mercy approached the table, her bad leg dragging slightly on the sawdust floor. She refused to look at the floor. She looked straight at her father. "This here is the girl," Obadiah said to the stranger. "She ain't much to look at, and she walks with a hitch, but she can cook a stew and sew a seam. She's quiet, mostly." Colton Graves didn't look at Obadiah. He looked at Mercy. For the first time, Mercy saw his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the color of steel, hard and unyielding, but there was no cruelty in them. There was only a profound, terrifying emptiness. He looked at her not like a piece of livestock, but like a riddle he was trying to solve. "Does she speak?" Colton's voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the table. When spoken to, Obadiah laughed nervously, usually just to complain. Colton stood up. The room seemed to shrink. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He dropped it on the table. The clinking sound of gold and silver coins silenced the room. $40, Colton said, "and the horse outside is yours, the gray mare." Mercy felt the blood drain from her face. $40. She was being sold for less than the price of a good plow. "Take her," Obadiah said, grabbing the pouch with greedy hands. "She's your problem now, Graves. No returns." Colton stepped around the table. He didn't grab her arm. He didn't drag her. He simply stood next to her, a wall of heat and animal fur. "Get your things," he said to her. It wasn't a command. It was a statement of fact. I have nothing," Mercy whispered, her voice trembling. "Just what I'm wearing." Colton looked at her thin shawl, her worn dress, and her boots that were practically falling apart. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He took off his heavy bear fur coat and, in a movement that stunned the entire room, draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, smelling of pine, wood smoke, and rain. It swallowed her small frame, weighing her down, yet instantly warming her. "Let's go," he said. Mercy looked back one last time at her father. Obadiah didn't even look up. He was too busy counting the coins. Beatrice was smiling a cruel, satisfied smile. Mercy turned and walked out into the mud, following the giant stranger into the dark. She didn't know if she was walking toward her death, but she knew for certain she had just left her hell. The journey up the mountain was a brutal awakening. Mercy had spent her life in the valley, where the winds were blocked by the peaks. Here, as they climbed higher into the timberline, the wind screamed. Colton rode a massive black stallion named Titan. He had placed Mercy on the saddle in front of him because she had no horse of her own, and she was too weak to walk the steep incline. For hours, they didn't speak. Mercy was rigid, her back pressing against his chest, terrified to relax. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her shoulder blades. He held the reins with gloved hands that were as large as dinner plates, yet he guided the horse with surprising gentleness up the treacherous, icy path. "Why?" Mercy finally asked. The word was ripped away by the wind, but he heard it. "Why what?" Colton replied, his voice near her ear. "Why buy me? You could have hired a maid in town. You could have found a woman who wasn't broken." Colton was silent for a long time. The only sound was the crunch of Titan's hooves on the frozen snow. "My cabin is 3 days' ride from town," he said finally. "No town woman would survive the winter up here. They need tea parties and church bells. And you think I can survive?" "You survived Obadiah Calloway," Colton said, his tone flat. "The cold is honest. A man like your father, that's a different kind of poison. If you can live through that, you can live through the snow." It was the most he had spoken since they met. It wasn't a compliment, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. He had seen her scars, not the physical ones, but the ones on her soul. By nightfall, they reached a small clearing sheltered by a rocky overhang. Colton dismounted and lifted her down as easily as if she were a sack of flour. Her bad leg buckled when she hit the ground, numbed by the cold in the ride. He caught her elbow, steadying her until she found her footing. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a dry patch of earth under the rock. Mercy sat, wrapping the massive coat tighter around herself. She watched as he built a fire with practiced efficiency. He didn't waste movement. Within minutes, a blaze was crackling. He set a cast iron pan over the flames and fried thick strips of salt pork and beans. When he handed her a tin plate, his fingers brushed hers. He was warm, impossibly warm. "Eat," he said. "You're too thin. The wind will blow you off the mountain if you don't get some weight on you." "I'm not useless," she blurted out, the words tasting like ash. "I can work. I can mend clothes. I can clean. I won't be a burden." Colton stopped eating. He looked at her across the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. "I didn't buy a mule, Mercy," he said softly. "Then what did you buy?" she challenged, fear making her bold. "A warmer for your bed?" The air between them grew tight. Mercy regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. She braced herself backhand, the response she would have received from Obadiah. Colton set his plate down. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "I have a cabin," he said slowly. "It has 2 rooms. One has a lock on the inside. That one is yours. I sleep in the main room." Mercy blinked, stunned. I don't understand." "You don't have to," Colton said, turning his gaze back to the fire. "But know this, I don't force women, and I don't hit them. You cook, you keep the fire fed, you keep the place from turning to dust while I'm out trapping. That's the trade. You get a roof, food, and no one screaming at you. I get A home that doesn't feel like a grave. A home that doesn't feel like a grave. Mercy looked at this dangerous, silent man. He sat alone on his side of the fire, staring into the dark woods as if waiting for an attack. She realized then that the loneliness radiating off him was thicker than the winter fog. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "I mean, what should I call you?" "Colton," he said. "Or Cole." "Thank you, Cole," she whispered. He didn't respond, but he shifted slightly, blocking the wind from hitting her directly. They rode for 2 more days. The terrain grew harsher, the trees thicker. They were entering a world where civilization was just a memory. On the 3rd afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range, they broke through a dense line of pines. There it was. It wasn't a shack. It was a sturdy, sprawling cabin built of massive logs, notched perfectly together. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A barn stood to the side, equally well built. It sat on a plateau overlooking a valley of white pine, isolated from the rest of the world by sheer cliffs and deep snow. "Home," Cole grunted. As they approached, a massive dog, part wolf, by the looks of it, bounded off the porch, barking deeply. Mercy flinched. "Down, Buster," Cole commanded. The beast instantly sat, tail thumping the snow. Cole helped Mercy down. She stood before the cabin, her breath pluming in the air. This was where she would live, with a stranger, miles from help. Cole opened the heavy oak door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, it was warm. The floors were smooth wood, not dirt. There were bearskins on the floor and shelves lined with books. Books! Mercy had expected squalor. Instead, she found a place that was ordered, clean, and surprisingly gentle. "The back room is yours." Cole pointed to a sturdy door on the left. "There's water in the basin. I've got to tend the horse." He left her there, standing in the center of the room. Mercy walked to the door he had indicated. She pushed it open. Inside was a bed with a quilt, a small window looking out at the mountains, and a heavy iron bolt on the inside of the door. Just as he had promised. She sat on the edge of the bed and ran her hand over the quilt. For the first time in 22 years, Mercy Calloway let out a breath she felt she had been holding since childhood. But as she looked out the window at the darkening woods, a shiver of unease ran through her. Why did a man like Colton Graves, a man who built a fortress, read books, and had $40 in gold to throw away, live up here alone? She walked back into the main room and saw something on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. It was a small, wooden carving of a bird. A mockingbird. It was delicate, beautiful, and unfinished. Next to it lay a tintype photograph, face down. Mercy hesitated, then turned the photo over. It was a picture of a younger Colton, clean-shaven, standing next to a beautiful woman with laughing eyes. They were holding hands. The door creaked open behind her. Mercy spun around, dropping the photo. It clattered on the hearth. Colton stood in the doorway, the cold wind swirling around him. His eyes dropped to the photo, then snapped up to hers. The softness she had seen at the campfire was gone. In its place was a flash of raw, jagged pain that looked a lot like rage. "I told you," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "to make yourself at home. I didn't say you could dig up ghosts." Mercy took a step back, her leg throbbing. She had found the sanctuary, but she had just stepped on a landmine she didn't know existed. The silence that followed the dropping of the photograph was heavier than the timber beams holding up the roof. Mercy stood frozen, her heart battering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected shouting. She expected the back of a hand. She expected to be dragged out into the snow and left for the wolves. But Colton Graves didn't move toward her. He moved toward the hearth. He knelt, his knees cracking audibly in the quiet room, and picked up the tintype with a gentleness that contradicted the storm in his eyes. He wiped the ash from the face of the woman in the picture with his thumb. "Go to your room," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was brittle, like ice about to snap. "Mr. Graves, I." "Go." Mercy turned and fled into the small back room, sliding the heavy iron bolt shut with trembling fingers. She sank to the floor, pressing her ear against the wood, listening. She heard the clink of a bottle, the scrape of a chair, and then silence. Long, suffocating silence. She didn't sleep that night. She lay under the thick quilt, staring at the ceiling, convinced that by morning she would be on her way back to Iron Creek. But morning came, and with it, the smell of coffee and frying bacon. When Mercy tentatively opened her door, the cabin was empty. A plate of food sat on the table, covered by a cloth. The photograph was gone from the mantelpiece, replaced by a box of rifle cartridges. Cole was gone. He didn't return for 2 days. For those 48 hours, Mercy was alone in the wilderness. Panic threatened to consume her, but beneath the fear, a spark of stubbornness ignited. They called you useless, she told herself. He paid $40 for you. Earn it. She went to work. She found a broom made of twigs and swept the floor until her hands blistered. She took the bearskins outside and beat the dust from them in the freezing air. She located the larder, stocked with sacks of flour, dried beans, coffee, and sugar, and organized the chaos. She found dirty shirts heaped in a corner, stiff with sweat and pine resin, and scrubbed them in a basin of boiling water until the water turned gray, then black, then clear. She wasn't fast. Her bad leg throbbed with every step, forcing her to take breaks, but she was thorough. When she found a bag of dried apples, she decided to make a pie. She made the crust from scratch, using lard and flour, rolling it out with a wine bottle she found in a crate. On the evening of the second day, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin like a banshee. Snow began to fall, thick and heavy. The door burst open. Colton stumbled in, covered in snow, a brace of skinned rabbits hanging from his belt. He looked exhausted. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he smelled of whiskey and cold air. He stopped dead in the doorway. The cabin was transformed. The floors gleamed in the firelight. The clutter was gone. The air didn't smell of stale smoke and dog. It smelled of cinnamon and baked apples. Colton dropped the rabbits on the sideboard and looked around, bewildered. His gaze landed on Mercy, who was standing by the stove, wiping her hands on a rag. I made supper, she said, her voice small. Stew and pie. Colton slowly took off his coat and hat. He walked to the table and sat down. He looked at the clean room, then at the steaming bowl of stew she placed before him. He took a bite, then another. He ate with the ferocity of a starving man, but he didn't say a word. When he finished, he pushed the bowl away and looked at her. The woman in the picture, he said abruptly. Mercy stiffened. Her name was Abigail. She was my wife. Colton stared at his rough hands. She died 4 years ago. Influenza. We were in Laramie. I couldn't do anything. I had money. I had strength. But I couldn't stop her from coughing her lungs out. Mercy moved closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. I came up here to get away from the noise, he continued. From people. From the pity. I didn't want to look at anyone who knew what I lost. He looked up at Mercy. I didn't bring you here to replace her, Mercy. You can't replace a ghost. I know, Mercy said softly. I'm not trying to be her. I'm just trying to be useful. You cleaned the guns, he noted, nodding toward the rack. I oiled them. My father, he taught me that much, at least. Rust is a sin, he used to say. Colton let out a breath, his shoulders sagging. The tension that had held him rigid for 2 days seemed to break. The pie smells good. It was a peace offering. Over the next few weeks, a routine settled over them. It wasn't a romance. It was a partnership of survival. Cole trapped and hunted. Mercy kept the world inside the cabin spinning. But the mountain was jealous. It didn't like intruders. In mid-December, a blizzard struck the Bitterroots with a violence that shook the cabin to its foundations. The temperature dropped so low that the moisture in the logs snapped like gunshots. Cole had gone out early to check the trapline near the ridge. He should have been back by noon. By 3 o'clock, the whiteout was total. You couldn't see the barn from the porch. Mercy paced the floor. She knew the rule, stay inside. But the wood box was empty. In her zeal to clean, she had burned through the dry wood faster than she realized, and the fire was dying. Without the fire, the cabin would become a tomb within hours. Just to the woodpile, she whispered to herself. Just 10 feet. She wrapped herself in the bear coat Cole had given her and opened the door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She grabbed a canvas tote and stepped off the porch. The snow was waist deep. Her bad leg dragged, heavy and useless in the drift. She made it to the woodpile, her fingers numb as she clawed at the frozen logs. She filled the tote. She turned to go back. The cabin was gone. The whiteout was so dense she couldn't see the light from the window. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She took a step in what she thought was the right direction. Her foot found a patch of ice beneath the snow. She slipped. Her bad knee twisted with a sickening pop. Mercy screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by the wind. She fell hard, the wood scattering. Pain blinded her. She tried to stand, but her leg collapsed. She began to crawl. She couldn't tell which way was north or south. She was just crawling into the white void. The cold began to seep into her mind, making her sleepy. It's not so bad, she thought dreamily. I'll just rest for a minute. Mercy! The voice was faint, like a memory. Mercy! Something grabbed her. Hands, strong and rough, hauled her up from the snow. She looked up into a face encrusted with ice. Cole. He didn't ask questions. He scooped her up into his arms, burying her face in his chest to shield her from the wind. He fought his way blindly through the storm, guided by instinct or perhaps sheer desperation, until his boot hit the porch steps. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, kicking it shut behind him. He laid her on the rug before the dying embers and immediately began stripping the frozen coat off her. "You foolish woman," he growled, his voice shaking. "You foolish, stubborn woman." He built the fire up until it roared. He checked her leg. It was swollen, angry and blue, but not broken. He packed it with snow to numb the swelling, then wrapped it in wool. Mercy was shivering violently, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. Cole sat behind her, pulling her back against his chest, wrapping both of them in the heavy quilts. I needed wood, she stuttered. I didn't want the fire to die. The fire can die. Cole whispered into her hair, his arms tightening around her. You can't! Mercy froze. The heat from his body was seeping into hers, chasing away the chill. But it was his words that warmed her most. Why? She asked, barely audible. I'm just a bad investment. Cole turned her in his arms so he could look at her face. The ice was melting in his beard, dripping onto her cheek. You're the only warm thing in this cold world, Mercy, he said roughly. Don't you ever say you're useless again. You kept my home. You kept me fed. And today I was terrified I'd lost you. He didn't kiss her. It was too soon, the wounds of his past too fresh. But he held her until the shivering stopped, his chin resting on the top of her head, staring into the fire as if daring it to go out. For the first time, Mercy didn't feel like a transaction. She felt like a treasure. Christmas came and went with a quiet grace. Cole carved her a set of buttons from deer antler for her dress. Mercy knitted him a scarf from yarn she'd unraveled from an old blanket. It wasn't much, but in the high cabin, it was everything. January brought the wolves. Not the four-legged kind, though those were plenty, but the wolves of circumstance. The winter was proving to be the harshest in a decade. Food was getting scarce. The deer had moved to lower elevations, and the trap lines were coming up empty. I have to go to the lower valley, Cole announced one morning, checking the load in his Winchester. There's a herd of elk wintering near the gorge. If I can bag one, we're set for meat until spring. Mercy looked up from the dough she was kneading. How long? 2 days. Maybe 3 if the snow is deep. He hesitated. You'll be alone. I've been alone before, she said, masking her anxiety. I have Buster. The massive wolf dog thumped his tail at the mention of his name. Cole walked over to the gun rack and pulled down a smaller rifle, a carbine, lighter than his heavy buffalo gun. Come outside. For the next hour, Cole taught her how to shoot. He didn't treat her like a child. He treated her like a soldier. Stock tight against the shoulder, he instructed, his hand firm on her back. Breathe out. Squeeze. Don't pull. If you pull, you miss. If you miss, you die. Mercy fired. The kickback bruised her shoulder, but she hit the tree stump 3 times out of 5. Good, Cole nodded. Keep the door bolted. If anyone comes up the trail, anyone who isn't me, you fire a warning shot. If they keep coming, you shoot to kill. Do you understand? Who would come up here, Cole? His eyes grew dark. Men like your father aren't the worst things in this territory, Mercy. There are drifters, deserters, men who see smoke and think victim. You guard this house. He left at noon. The first night was uneventful. Mercy slept with the carbine leaning against the nightstand. Buster slept at the foot of the bed, a low, rumbling heater. The second day, the sun shone brightly, blinding off the snow. Mercy did her chores, fed the horses in the barn, and chopped kindling. She felt a strange sense of pride. She was managing. She was the mistress of Devil's Spine. Sunset brought a change in the air. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. Buster stood up, the hackles on his back rising into a stiff ridge. He let out a low, menacing growl, staring at the door. Mercy's blood ran cold. She grabbed the carbine. "What is it, boy?" Buster ran to the door, barking furiously. Mercy moved to the window. In the twilight, she saw movement near the barn. It wasn't a man. It was low, sleek, and tawny. A cougar. It was massive, a starving male driven down from the peaks by hunger. It was prowling around the barn, smelling the horses inside. Titan, Cole's stallion, screamed from within the stall, the sound of hooves battering wood echoing across the yard. "No," Mercy whispered. "No, you don't." If the cat got into the barn, it would slaughter the horses. Without the horses, Cole couldn't haul the meat back. They would be stranded. Mercy didn't think. She threw open the door. "Get him, Buster!" The dog launched himself off the porch, a blur of gray fur. The cougar spun around, snarling, just as Buster collided with it. The two animals became a rolling ball of teeth and claws in the snow. Mercy stepped onto the porch, raising the rifle. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't shoot. She might hit Buster. The cat was bigger. It pinned the dog, its jaws clamping onto Buster's shoulder. Buster yelped, a sound that tore at Mercy's heart. "Hey!" she screamed. "Hey!" The cougar lifted its head, yellow eyes locking onto her. It saw easier prey. It released the dog and crouched, tail twitching. It was 20 yards away. It could cover that distance in 2 seconds. Mercy remembered Cole's voice. Stock tight. Breathe out. Squeeze. The cat. Mercy fired. The gun bucked against her shoulder. The cat twisted in midair, letting out a shriek that sounded almost human, and crashed into the snow 5 feet from the porch. It thrashed once, then went still. Mercy worked the lever, ejecting the shell, and aimed again. But the beast didn't move. Silence rushed back into the valley. Mercy dropped the gun and ran down the steps. "Buster!" The dog was dragging himself toward her, leaving a trail of red in the white snow. His shoulder was torn open, bleeding badly. Mercy fell to her knees, heedless of the cold, and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I've got you," she sobbed. "I've got you." Getting a 100-pound dog up the porch steps and into the cabin with a bad leg was a feat of adrenaline Mercy couldn't explain later. She managed to drag him onto the rug by the fire. She raided Cole's supply of whiskey in his sewing kit. "This is going to hurt," she told the dog, tears streaming down her face. She poured the whiskey into the wound. Buster whined but didn't bite. With shaking hands, she threaded the needle and began to stitch the torn flesh, just as she had stitched her father's torn shirts 1,000 times. She was covered in blood, her dress, her hands, her face. She sat there for hours, stroking the dog's head, the dead cougar lying stiff in the yard outside. At midnight, the door opened. Cole froze in the threshold. He saw the blood on the floor. He saw the blood on Mercy's dress. He saw her slumped against the hearth, eyes closed. "Mercy!" The roar that left his chest was the sound of a man whose heart was breaking. He dropped his pack and the elk antlers he was carrying, rushing to her side. He fell to his knees, grabbing her shoulders. "Mercy! Where are you hurt? Who did this?" Mercy's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, dazed. "Cole? I'm here. I'm here. Look at me. Where are you shot?" He was frantic. his hands searching her arms, her torso, looking for the wound. "I'm not." Mercy pushed his hands away gently. "I'm not hurt, Cole. It's Buster." Cole stopped. He looked at the dog, sleeping fitfully with a bandaged shoulder. He looked at the whiskey bottle and the bloody needle. Then he looked out the open door and saw the dark shape of the mountain lion in the snow. He looked back at Mercy. She was small, smeared with blood, exhausted and trembling. And she was the fiercest thing he had ever seen. "You killed it?" he whispered. "It was going for Titan," she said. "Then it went for Buster. I squeezed. I didn't pull." Cole sat back on his heels. He let out a long, shaky breath. He reached out and cupped her face in his large, rough hands. His thumbs brushed away a smear of blood on her cheek. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw the blood and I thought, I'm still here," she said. "Yes," he said, the steel in his eyes melting into something molten and hot. "You are." He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, tasting of fear and relief and winter air. Mercy hesitated for a heartbeat, then melted into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat. It was a claim. He was claiming her, not as a purchase, but as his equal. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "My wife," he whispered. "You are my wife, Mercy, in every way that matters." Mercy's heart soared, but before she could reply, Buster let out a low growl, his ears perking up despite his injury. Cole instantly stiffened. He stood up, the tenderness vanishing, replaced by the predator. He walked to the door and looked out into the darkness. "What is it?" Mercy asked, fear returning. "Tracks," Cole said, staring at the snow beyond the dead cougar. "Fresh ones." "Horse tracks." "From your horse?" "No." Cole turned back to her, his face grim. "I came from the south. These tracks are coming from the east, from town." He walked to the gun rack and grabbed the Winchester. "Someone followed the sound of your shot, Mercy. We have company." Outside, a voice called out from the tree line, smooth, mocking, and chillingly familiar to Cole. "Colton!" "You can't hide forever, old friend. I heard yourself a little pet. Why don't you invite us in?" Cole's face went pale. He looked at Mercy. "Blow out the lamp," he ordered. "Now!" Mercy blew out the flame, plunging them into darkness. "Who is it?" she whispered. "His name is Silas Vane," Cole said, racking the slide of his rifle. "And he's the man who killed my first wife." The darkness inside the cabin was total, save for the dying embers of the fire which cast long, dancing shadows against the logs. Mercy crouched beneath the windowsill, clutching the carbine to her chest. Her hands were still sticky with the blood of the dog and the cougar, but her tremor was gone. Fear had burned it away, leaving only a cold, sharp clarity. "Who is he?" Mercy whispered. Cole was positioned at the gun port, a small, removable notch in the log wall that he had revealed only moments ago. He was watching the tree line. "Beauregard Raker," Cole said, his voice a low rumble. "We rode together in the cavalry, then as deputies in Wyoming. He was the best shot I ever saw, and the most corrupt soul I ever met. He killed your wife? We were transporting a prisoner." A boy who saw Raker skimming money from the railroad contracts. Raker tried to kill the boy to silence him. "Abigail." She stepped in the way. Cole paused, the silence heavy with old grief. "I put a bullet in Raker's chest and left him for dead. I thought he was rotting in a pine box. Turns out, the devil looks after his own." "Colton!" Raker's voice drifted from the trees again, jovial and sick. "I know you're in there, and I know you're hurt. I saw the blood on the porch. Why don't you send the little lady out? We won't hurt her." "Much." Mercy felt Cole stiffen beside her. "He thinks it's my blood," Cole realized. "He thinks I'm the one who bled on the snow." "Let him think it," Mercy said sharply. "If he thinks you're weak, he'll be careless." Cole looked at her in the dark. A grim smile touched his lips. "You catch on fast, Mrs. Graves." "How many?" she asked. "I count 4 horses, Raker and 3 hired guns. They'll try to flank us. 2 from the front, 2 circling to the barn. The horses," Mercy gasped. If they take the barn, they won't take the barn, Cole said, handing her a box of ammunition. Because you're going to cover the back door. Me? Mercy's stomach dropped. Cole, I killed a cat at 20 paces. These are men. They are just animals who can talk, Mercy. If they come through that back door, they will kill us both. Can you do it? Mercy thought of her father selling her for $40. She thought of the way the townspeople looked through her. She thought of the warmth of Cole's chest against her back during the blizzard. Yes, she said. Good girl. Cole moved to the front window. On my mark, outside, the crunch of snow was audible. They were getting closer. Now, Cole shouted. He shattered the front window with the butt of his rifle and opened fire. The boom of the Winchester 1876 was deafening in the small space. A scream of pain echoed from the yard. One down! Cole yelled, working the lever action with lightning speed. Bullets hammered the heavy logs of the cabin. Wood splinters flew like shrapnel. Mercy crawled to the back of the cabin, dragging her bad leg, and positioned herself near the kitchen door. She peered through a crack in the wood. Shadows were moving against the white snow. 2 men, hunched low, running toward the barn. Cole! She screamed. The barn! Cole couldn't turn. He was pinned down by suppressing fire from the tree line where Raker was hiding. Mercy realized she was on her own. She lifted the carbine. It felt heavier than before. She rested the barrel on a crate of dry beans. One of the men stopped at the barn door, fumbling with the latch. Breathe out. Squeeze. Mercy fired. The bullet missed the man, but struck the iron hinge of the door with a spark that lit up the night. The man jumped back, startled. She's got a gun! The man yelled. The girl's shooting! Well, shoot back! You idiot! Came the reply. Bullets tore through the kitchen door, shattering a jar of pickled eggs on the shelf above Mercy's head. Vinegar and glass rained down on her. She covered her head, sobbing once in terror, then rolled onto her back and fired blindly through the door. I'm not useless, she gritted out, working the lever. I am not useless. She fired again, and again, until the gun clicked empty. Mercy, get down! Cole roared. He abandoned his post at the front and dove across the room, tackling her just as a Molotov cocktail. A whiskey bottle stuffed with a burning rag sailed through the broken front window. It smashed against the far wall. The bearskin rug caught fire instantly. Fire! Cole yelled. They're burning us out! The cabin, built of seasoned pine and filled with dry goods, was a tinderbox. The smoke began to pool at the ceiling immediately, thick and acrid. We have to go, Cole coughed, pulling Mercy up. The trapdoor. What trapdoor? Cole kicked aside the rug in the center of the room, revealing a square cut into the floorboards. Root cellar. It exits under the porch. It's our only chance. The heat was already blistering. The flames were climbing the curtains, eating the books. Cole's precious books. Go! Cole shoved her toward the hole. Mercy dropped into the darkness, landing on a pile of potatoes. Cole dropped down beside her and pulled the hatch shut above them. The sounds of the fire became a muffled roar, like a train passing overhead. Is there a way out? Mercy choked on the dust. Crawl, Cole ordered. Tunnel leads to the crawl space under the porch. We come out behind the woodpile. They crawled through the damp earth, the heat from the floorboards above radiating down on them. Mercy's bad knee dragged in the dirt, screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. They reached the lattice work of the porch. Through the slats, Mercy could see the snow illuminated by the orange glow of the burning cabin. The men were laughing. Roast 'em out! One voice cheered. Keep your eyes peeled, Raker's voice cut through the laughter. Graves is a cockroach. He's hard to kill. Cole put his lips to Mercy's ear. I'm going to create a diversion. When I start shooting, you run for the trees. Don't look back. No, Mercy grabbed his arm. I'm not leaving you. Mercy, listen to me. No, you bought a wife, Cole. That means till death do us part. We fight together. Cole looked at her in the orange, flickering light. He saw the resolve in her face. He nodded once. All right, the barn. We need the horses. I'll take the 2 on the left. You take the one near the trough. Cole kicked the lattice work open. They burst out of the crawl space into the freezing night. The sudden appearance of 2 figures from beneath the burning cabin took Raker's men by surprise. Cole fired from the hip, his Winchester barking twice. The man standing near the trough. the one who had shot at Mercy earlier, crumpled, clutching his stomach. There! Raker screamed from behind a pine tree. Bullets zipped past them. Mercy scrambled through the snow, her breath tearing at her throat. She didn't have a gun anymore. She had left the empty carbine inside. She only had a skinning knife she had grabbed from the root cellar. Cole provided covering fire, walking backward, drawing their attention. Get to the barn! Mercy! Go! Mercy reached the barn door. She slipped inside, the smell of hay and panicked horses hitting her. Titan was rearing in his stall, eyes rolling in terror at the fire and noise. She didn't grab a horse. She knew they couldn't outrun bullets on horseback in deep snow. She grabbed Cole's double-barreled shotgun hanging on a nail by the tack room. She broke it open, loaded. Outside, the gunfire stopped abruptly. I'm empty! Cole's voice. A curse. Mercy peered through the slat in the barn wood. Cole was kneeling in the snow, surrounded by 3 men. His rifle lay a few feet away. He had his hands up. Blood was streaming from a graze on his forehead, blinding him in one eye. Beauregard Raker stepped out from the shadows. He was a handsome man, in a polished way, wearing a long duster coat and a silver belly hat. He held a pearl-handled revolver. Well, well, Raker sneered, walking toward Cole. Look at the great mountain man, burnt out of his hole. Let the girl go, Beau, Cole said, his voice steady. She's got nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it, Raker smiled. She's the witness to your pathetic end, just like you were the witness to my business transactions. Raker cocked the hammer of his revolver. He aimed it squarely at Cole's chest. Any last words, old friend? Yeah, Cole said, looking past Raker toward the barn. Duck! Raker frowned. What? Boom! The barn door exploded outward as Mercy kicked it open. She didn't hesitate. She leveled the shotgun and fired the left barrel. The buckshot didn't hit Raker. He was too far, but it hit the man standing next to him. The hired gun was lifted off his feet and thrown into the snowbank. Raker spun around, eyes wide. You little witch! He fired at Mercy. The bullet splintered the door frame inches from her face. Mercy didn't flinch. She stepped out into the open, the fire from the burning cabin illuminating her silhouette. She looked like an avenging angel in a blood-stained dress. Leave my husband alone, she screamed. She fired the second barrel. Raker dove to the side, the shot tearing through the tail of his coat. In the chaos, Cole moved. He didn't go for his rifle. He lunged at the nearest hired gun, a bearded giant named Dutch. Cole slammed his shoulder into the man's gut, driving him into the ground. They grappled in the snow, fists flying. Raker scrambled to his feet, raising his gun to shoot Cole in the back. Mercy dropped the empty shotgun. She saw Raker aiming. She had no weapon. She ran. She ran not away, but toward them. Her bad leg screamed, but she forced it to work, driven by a power she didn't know she possessed. She tackled Raker from the side just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, pinging off the barn bell. Raker roared in fury and backhanded Mercy. The blow was heavy, catching her on the cheekbone. She flew backward, landing hard in the snow, darkness spotting her vision. Stupid cripple, Raker spat, standing over her. He pointed the gun at her face. I'll kill you first, then I'll make him watch. Mercy looked up at the barrel of the gun. She saw the rifling inside. She saw death. Then a shadow fell over Raker. A low, guttural snarl vibrated through the air. Raker looked back. Buster. The wounded dog had dragged himself out of the burning cabin, his fur singed, his bandage trailing. He wasn't running. He was launching himself. Buster clamped his jaws onto Raker's gun arm. Raker screamed, the gun firing into the sky as he flailed, trying to shake the massive animal off. Get off me! Get off! Cole, having knocked Dutch unconscious, saw his opening. He pulled his Bowie knife from his boot. He didn't run. He stalked. Raker managed to kick the dog away. Buster landed in the snow with a yelp, too weak to attack again. Raker raised his gun toward the dog. No! Mercy shrieked, but Raker never pulled the trigger. Cole Graves slammed into him, driving the knife deep into Raker's shoulder, pinning him to the frozen earth. Raker howled. The gun fell from his useless fingers. Cole straddled him, his face a mask of cold, terrifying judgment. He pressed his forearm against Raker's throat. "I should kill you," Cole growled, the flames of his burning home reflecting in his eyes. "For Abigail, for my home, for touching her." Raker gasped for air, his eyes bulging. "Do it, you coward!" Cole raised the knife. "Cole!" Mercy's voice cut through the red haze of his rage. Cole froze. He looked up. Mercy was sitting in the snow, clutching her bruised face, her other hand resting on Buster's head. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't let him turn you into a murderer again. We aren't him." Cole looked at the knife, then at Raker, then at Mercy. He slowly stood up, dragging Raker by the collar. He punched Raker once, hard, in the jaw. Raker went limp. Cole dropped him in the snow. He turned to Mercy. He walked over and fell to his knees, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, shaking uncontrollably. "I thought I lost you," he choked out. "I thought I lost you." Mercy held him, stroking his hair, watching the flames consume the cabin. They had lost everything. The house, the books, the food. But as she looked at the man holding her like she was the most precious thing on earth, and the loyal dog licking her hand, Mercy Calloway knew the truth. She hadn't lost a thing. The sun rose over the blackened scar on the mountain. The cabin, Colton's sanctuary, was a heap of smoldering charcoal. But inside the barn, life remained. "We can't stay here," Cole said, his voice raspy from smoke. "If a storm hits, we starve." "Then we go to town," Mercy replied, standing up. Her face was bruised from Raker's backhand, but her eyes were clear. "I'm not the same girl who left Iron Creek, Cole. And you aren't the ghost who bought her." They descended the mountain 3 days later. The entry into Iron Creek was a spectacle. The ghost of Devil's Spine, battered and bruised, led the prisoner Beauregard Raker on a rope. Riding beside him, not behind him, was Mercy. She sat atop the massive stallion, Titan, wearing her bear fur coat like royal robes. They dumped Raker at the sheriff's boots. $500, Sheriff Miller stammered, eyeing the bounty poster. "That's the reward." Cole looked at Mercy. They had lost everything in the fire. "We need nails, lumber, and glass," he said. "We'll take it," Mercy said softly. "We have a home to rebuild." As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, a hateful, familiar laugh cut through the cold air. "Look what the cat dragged back!" Obadiah Calloway stood on the porch of the general store, thumbs hooked in his suspenders. "I heard you burn down his house. Girl, I told you, Graves! I told you she was a bad investment. Now look at you, homeless and dragging a cripple back to her daddy." Cole's fists clenched, the violence bubbling up, but Mercy placed a hand on his chest. "No, Cole, this is mine." She dismounted, her bad leg hitting the mud. She didn't stumble. She walked until she was 2 feet from her father. "I am not homeless," Mercy said, her voice ringing like a bell. "And I am not yours. You're my flesh and blood," Obadiah sneered. "Get in the kitchen. You're broken goods, but you can still scrub a floor." Mercy smiled, a cold, sad expression. "I kept his home warm. I saved his life, and he saved mine. I am not a bad investment, Father. I am the woman who killed a lion and faced down 4 gunmen to protect my family." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver dollar she'd found in Raker's saddlebag. She flipped it into the mud at Obadiah's feet. "You sold me for $40. Keep the change. It's all you'll ever get from me. You walk away, and you're nothing." Obadiah screamed as she turned her back. Mercy paused and looked at Cole, who watched her with pure, unadulterated awe. "I may be broken to you, Obadiah, but I am loved, and that makes me richer than you will ever be." She took Cole's hand. "Let's go home, husband. 6 months later." Spring wildflowers painted the Devil's Spine in riots of purple and yellow. The new cabin was larger, with a wide porch facing the sunrise. Mercy sat on the swing, sewing a quilt from fine blue cotton. Cole walked up from the garden, wiping sweat from his brow. He sat beside her, resting his rough hand on her knee. "Thinking about the old cabin?" he asked. "No," Mercy smiled. "I was thinking about the day you bought me." Cole chuckled. Best $40 I ever spent. I robbed that man blind. Mercy looked out over the valley, placing Cole's hand gently over her stomach, where the first swell of new life was just beginning to show. He sold a useless girl, she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. And I got a kingdom. Cole kissed her forehead, the fierce mountain man tamed by the quiet strength of the woman in his arms. You built the kingdom, Mercy, he said. I just put up the walls. And that is the story of Mercy and Cole. In a world that measured worth in dollars and labor, they found something priceless in each other. It's a reminder that sometimes the things society labels as broken or useless are actually just waiting for the right person to see their true value. What did you think of Mercy's transformation? Do you think she was right to confront her father, or should she have just ridden away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please do me a favor. Hit that like button to help us share these stories with more people, and subscribe so you never miss a journey into the Wild West. Until next time, keep your fires burning.